I'm Stephen Reeve, Executive Director of Historic Ketchikan, an entity that's been in business for 30-some years. Terry and I were part of the founding members. I'm an architect, and I also do historic preservation projects around town.
All right, Amanda.
I'm Amanda Welsh. I'm an architect at Welsh Whiteley Architects. Some of the work we do is historic preservation related. I'm also a community volunteer. I'm currently on the Historic Commission, and in the past I've served with Historic Ketchikan and the Thomas Historical Society.
Thank you. Tim.
Tim Whiteley with Welsh Whiteley Architects. Not on as many communities as Amanda.
I'm only on one now.
Okay, but preservation advocate.
And Terry.
Terry Wanzer, Stephen and I are both founding members of Historic Ketchikan, currently president. And also, I forgot to mention before that I'm a real estate broker with Coastal Real Estate Group. I've sold and bought a lot of these properties for individuals. Also in the Landing Hotel, and about 100 employees. So there's a lot of people all of us around here are responsible for. Thank you for having us here.
Why does historic preservation matter?
As the economics change, I've been in business long before the cruise ships were here, and there was a spruce mill downtown from 1905 to 1985. So there was an active mill downtown. So it has changed immensely since all of us have come to Ketchikan. But we found that people visiting towns, or when they come to see your area, the third greatest reason they come to visit is to find out about the history and the character of the downtown. And a lot of those have disappeared throughout them.
I think it also matters for our community character. Ketchikan is a very unique and special place, and it's easy to forget when we spend a lot of years here, but we have historic buildings and infrastructure like boardwalk streets and stairwells that are really unusual for communities on this planet. So it's preserving our historic buildings helps keep our community.
Is there something that you wish people knew more about preservation work? So whoever would like to weigh in on that one?
Let's see. Yes, we wish everyone appreciated historic buildings and really cared when historic property owners renovate their buildings. One of the things we really hope for is that they're very respectful of the historic details, so that especially windows and entry and trim materials are used so that it translates directly as the historic building continues to do so. So yeah, we advocate all the time amongst ourselves as well as a lot of other folks around town. And we end up, I think we all have kind of a sickness, we end up continuing to restore historic properties. It doesn't seem to end.
Yeah, well, I'm going to keep that unique character. Tim and Amanda, can you speak to the Bottom Street Brewery property? I mean, because that's one that you all were involved with.
Yeah, it's a unique building in the sense that it's concrete, and not a lot of people are surprised by that, but it's a great material for here, believe it or not. And it was built during World War II. It was kind of an essential building for the hospital that isn't there anymore, so it makes sense it was made out of concrete. But when we approached it, we thought, well, we wanted to add some insulation, because it didn't have any insulation in it, but we didn't want to monkey with the outside of the building. So that was our approach to that, and we basically modernized the building, new electrical, mechanical system, and
It was the laundry, wasn't it?
yeah, it was laundry. The middle floor was the laundry for the hospital. The lower floor were the boilers, and the top floor were the nuns/nurses sleeping quarters. So, and there's a giant stack on it because the hospital used to be quite tall and it had to get above that.
We get a lot of questions about the chimney.
Yes.
Well, Terry mentioned, some of those unique architectural features. Going into a project like that, or renovating an old building and making it, usable for now, and making it more green, insulating it, those things. Were there specific elements that you wanted to make certain to preserve in that project?
Well, probably the window openings. You know, a lot of older buildings have really large windows. Those windows, I think, are 5 feet tall. You can stand almost in the opening, and it just provides a ton of daylight. Like there's times in the summer when we don't need the lights on, and that's something that you just don't see in new buildings much. So that was an important thing.
And I know you've spoken to, you know, the economic driver. Have you noticed that with those who are opening businesses or working and running their businesses out of these historic buildings, that they prefer an older building to something that's new and cookie cutter?
I think having a building that has character and some, you know, sort of a classic look is attractive to renters. I mean, I think that's why Bond Street Brewing is there. It also happened to be a really excellent location for a brewery because it was all concrete and had floor drains and high ceilings. It was a pretty ideal space.
And so recently too, so the Yates Memorial Hospital was listed on the 2020 list of the most endangered properties with the National Historic Trust. That's sad that it's on the list, but it's fantastic that that exposure happened and people were made more aware of the Yates Memorial Hospital. Can you talk a little bit about that project and the work that has been being undertaken as far as that preservation project?
Well, it's been our #1 priority for historic preservation at Historic Ketchikan for a number of years here. There have been some challenges getting it to a point of being able to restore. We've done actually an awful lot of work to restore portions of it. We have a long way to go. It's, again, a very important building. It was the hospital for Ketchikan when Ketchikan was doing all of its boom years from basically 1904 to 1925. And there's wonderful stories of the women, especially who were the nurses there and kept everyone alive around, you know, from Wrangell to, this was the only hospital between Juneau and Seattle. So it was serving all of the fishermen and miners and loggers in the area and the builders of our community. So really, they were stalwart women doing this work. And it had other elements of its history too. It moved on, it's had 2 or 3 significant activities in the building. And through that, there's a lot to learn about our community.
Well, it doesn't hurt that it's a beautiful building too.
Yeah.
Well, architecturally, it's almost in its original condition, except for the back portion of it, which was built in the 70s. We'd like to bring it back to where the sun porches in its original condition reappears. But there's an ownership as far as the church property, setback, zoning, you know, rehabilitation. So it's like Steve says, it's a big task. We take a long time. The one we did at Clover Pass, remember, took us 14 years.
Yes. Well, it's a challenge for a nonprofit to work with an entity like the church to pull things together. Really, the way I like to approach historic preservation on my own is if I actually acquire the building and can make all the decisions about it. We're in the process of that. So.
How did you go about choosing a historic property to buy and make into a personal project?
Well, we looked at a lot of buildings. And we looked in different locations, not just the downtown. It was time for us to move out of the Heckman building where we started. And the building that we finally ended up purchasing was the one on Bottom Street. And it was attractive because of its concrete construction. There wasn't a whole lot of rot to deal with. There was some, but not a whole lot.
You don't like working with good buildings?
I love big buildings, but this was a good choice.
Problem with preservation and rehabilitating a building is that you do the work twice. I mean, it's different from new construction in the fact that you start from the ground up with materials. Well, the historic property, you take it all apart and then you put it back together again. So you're doing all the labor twice over. And then there's always these discoveries of unknowns.
Yes.
You think you've done your due diligence and then you think, oh no.
can you guys weigh in then on, I mean, there's an intrinsic material value to an older building as opposed to new construction. Can you speak a little bit to that? What do you discover whenever you see some of these older buildings and those construction methods or materials?
Yeah, I mean, there's one of the things that popped into my head was that there's inherently a lot of energy already put into a historic building, and just to tear it down and build new, you're just adding all that more carbon that you're producing. So that's a motivator right there. But then a lot of times the buildings are sited really well too, and you don't really realize it until you get there and see like, wow, this porch is on the the leeward side of the building. And that's a great place. And you wouldn't, a lot of times when you design a building, you don't know that because you're not out in the rain on a site. The best way to site it. But then also just like the siding, like on our house, the Doug Fir channel siding, it's just bomb proof and it's 8 years old, and it just takes like Terry said, it takes some elbow grease and a little effort, but you've got a great material underneath all that paint. And it's going to last another 80 years at least.
The home I live in was built by the Milton Daly family, and they owned the spruce mill, and they built it in 1936. Well, I'm old now. I bought it from her. She was the original owner and builder of that house. And like Tim says, when they chose these lots, we don't have soil in Ketchikan. We have rock and we have muskeg. Rock you have to shoot, muskeg you have to dig out and put back in. So they built a lot of this downtown on areas that wouldn't move, and on rock, continued to the rocks. And plus they could see the channel because there was a lot of activity that they needed to see, boats coming in, freighters coming in. Well, the Daly family, they could look right down on the mill at that time. And as Tim says, where they position things, you get more light, you get more the sunshine, and your materials don't, they're better materials. All of the materials in my house came from Ketchikan spruce mill. In fact, the entire house was made out of cedar. Even the planed joists in the floor. And they were Irish, so they always had the shutters and the roof green and the house white, and it remains that way today.
Now, are there some, you mentioned the coloration of the building, and we've got a lot of resources as far as historic photos and accounts from people as far as some of these original buildings, how they appeared. Are there resources that you would direct people to if they wanted to, in the course of planning their own, rehab or renovation projects to pursue to kind of make certain that they're, taking that building back to its more original state?
Well, the museum is a fantastic source, of course. The archives here,
Right.
Everyone at the museum over the years I've worked in historic preservation has been so helpful. We've been able to
The photo
receive.
collection.
Yeah,
Wow.
exactly. And then in turn, each one of us as individuals have a lot of historic information too. Historic Ketchikan has built quite a resource library itself, so it's pretty easy to get information. There have been a lot of studies of historic neighborhoods in the area and individual properties. Those are available through the state, typically, probably here in the archives.
And you've authored a lot of them yourself.
I've done a bunch, but a lot of others have worked on it too. So,
I would say Google is a great resource too. If you're curious what style of window was popular in the 1920s, that's a really easy search. Over the years, we've seen a lot of, I think, well-meaning work on buildings where they've got a 1920s house and they put on 1880s gingerbread trim, or so it's helpful if you look at historic photos and if you do a little research on the era that your house was built in.
Plus, it's always fun to kind of, see houses and buildings as those vessels of memory that you were talking about, continuity and community, and the fact that, years and years people have memories of going into these buildings like the Yates, was it the Sportsman or the
Alaska Sports.
Alaska Sportsman.
Yeah, so
It's a precursor to Alaska Magazine. Right?
Deep history. So have there been any real surprises that you'd like to share with us, whether it's something that you found in the course of renovation or just that surprised you about the history of building here in Ketchikan? Big ask, I know. I just throw them out there.
We
for
found
you.
a it was kind of a weird situation, but we found a hidden shelf in our house that was probably like a prohibition place where they hid booze. And that was kind of fun to see.
It was in the closet above the hatch on the floor.
In the race having drugs, when they dug up the floor, there was a gigantic potato peeler, a machine.
Oh.
And I collect things from buildings that go away. My basement is a trail, but I have boiler fronts from the old main school. When we bought the Gilmore in 1980, the coinage in the 30s, silver dollars, of course, and all different kinds of coins, and they had real silver flatware. So there was a machine in there that polished the silver, and it had very small ball bearings and a motor, and you lock it down and it rotated around and around and around. It's very cool, very well made. It's in my basement. But also, and I left it there, when I bought the Gilmore in 1980, when I was a child, we had air raids, and you had to get underneath your desk, you know, in case the Russians were going to take over America during the Cold War. And so they had civil defense, and civil defense issued food supplies and water. And so there was a vault in the safe in the Gilmore, and then the stairway slanted down, and there was some boards there. And I pulled them apart, and here were all the civil defense boxes in cardboard with all those emergency supplies. I put the wood back there, and it's still there.
You know where to go in the event.
Well, I hope that the owners haven't removed it, but I don't think they know where it is.
Yeah, that's good.
But we'll use that knowledge wisely.
Yeah.
So there are quite a few different buildings that are registered with the National Historic Registry. Can you speak to some of those that are here in town?
You know, we have 3 National Registered Historic Districts in Ketchikan, downtown, Creek Street, and Stedman Thomas, and that's rare. There's no other community in West with more than one. And within those, there are a number of individual National Registered properties. There are many buildings, though. For example, in the downtown, there's 35 buildings or sites, like say Ketchikan, Totem, or others, that would qualify for the National Register. They're called contributing properties. And so there's a lot of information about those. Not all of them are actually on the register, but they would be eligible for the register. It's kind of a job to get them the next step to the National Register.
If they're in the district, technically they are on the register, they're just not individually called out.
And sites as well, like the Grant Street Trestle and a couple of others.
So, you know, it is quite a bit of work to, you know, get that rolling as far as, you know, that process. What's the incentive? Why should people look to get buildings on the National Historic Registry?
What was the question?
You know,
why
do you go to the time?
Well, there's several things. There's recognition of them as eligible for and important to the nation and state and local government. So it's a recognition thing. But there's also benefits to being on the register. There are tax benefits if you play it right. You can benefit from tax benefits on your construction for those. It's not easy to do that. Not everyone does it. I haven't done it, but I know. But it's done commonly across the country.
Larger project. I think another advantage would be for me is that you want to maintain that character, in perpetuity, the building. There are nuances where people come to an area, they want to develop a site or an area, and through either condemnation by the city or maybe a new road, by getting that designation, it stabilizes that being there forever, because that recognition, people have decided that it needs to be there. Not every building they muddle them or do so many different things to it, they don't qualify. And so if they do it right, and you want to see that, and we count that as a success, that you see these buildings and they get that designation, we know that, okay, that's great. It's going to be there for a long time. It's not going to go away.
Yeah.
So how can people get involved in historic preservation within their own homes or even as advocates for buildings in the community?
Well, I'll plug Historic Ketchikan. But that's a great board, and Amanda's been on it in the past, and it's a great way to meet with people in town that do that and learn about it.
There are actually quite a few historic organizations and boards in town that are always looking for enthusiastic board members. So there's I think some people are spread thin among several boards.
It's the same people that volunteer.
It's a great way to get involved.
We could listen to the City Historic Commission.
Right. August Historical Society, Historic Ketchikan. There's a museum advisory board. There are native cultural organizations. I'm not sure what else. What else are we looking at?
There's Alaska's Association of Historic Preservation.
Mm-hmm.
And they're celebrating their 40th year this
Right.
year.
Yeah.
And I clicked on those sites, Erica, that you sent in your email, and I read through them, and especially focusing on the Boise, Michigan,
Yes.
where they had the Main Street program. When we started Historic Ketchikan, we wanted to do the Main Street program. We invited, I'll never forget it, from San Francisco, Elizabeth Henning. She came up, she was head of the Western region. We had a great big gala. We all dressed up in historic clothing. I didn't remember that. That was really fun. And so, but it was too expensive. In those days, it was $200,000 or something to do the program. That's why we stepped back, formed Historic Ketchikan, and did assistance, through our own methods. But that's a real success story, that Boise, Michigan program. They have done very well. It looks like they attracted 70 different businesses to the downtown core. And one of the elements I saw that they alluded to too is residency. You see this exodus of the downtown core where people don't live there anymore. That synergy is lost then if you don't have that activity. There used to be a lot of rooming houses in downtown Ketchikan. I think there's only maybe one or two. They're gone. The mixture of businesses, you had meat markets, you had clothing stores. Ketchikan's a little strange. Everybody kind of copies each other. So I can remember when pizza came to town, and there were 20 pizza places in town. Everybody did it. When 8-tracks came, for videos, there were 15 video stores in Ketchikan. And we used to pride ourselves that we had 34 bars and 32 churches at one time because of the industry. And then all of a sudden we got 55 jewelry stores. But now those are kind of going away. And so I don't know what's next.
Yes.
I would, purely though, for history, I would like to see that mixture. And that was a success story in that Michigan town, is that mixture of business created that energy to keep it alive. And we have a great arts community, and that is, I think, really helping.
There's definitely an inspiration from living within a historic building or within a community that prizes historic homes or just buildings, businesses, all of it. It does kind of seem to breed creativity, at least for Ketchikan.
I was going to add that on your question,
Sure.
how can people get engaged in
Yes.
historic preservation? Over the years, we've helped Historic Ketchikan has helped people with, for example, paint color selection. We've done 130 paint color schemes in Ketchikan. So we're there to help as well and advise on window treatments and other issues related to historic preservation. So it's a two-way street. And we certainly welcome members. We have a membership program at historiccatchikan.org. Someone can participate as a member of the Historic Ketchikan. So,
Another way to plug in.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. So you've all been involved in renovation. Can you tell me what are some of the things about living here in Ketchikan, Alaska, that makes historic preservation more difficult or unique?
I would say the weather. If you have a
Oh my
historic
God.
building, the weather is tough.
Paint, paint job will last someplace else 10 years. We're lucky to get 2 to 3 years. And people come to town, they go, oh my gosh, this looks ugly. But it falls apart so fast. And then you get a lot of rot, you get roofs that leak, you get, because of the 13 feet of rain.
Can you guys speak to the logistics of getting building material here or getting skilled craftspeople? Is there a good community here, or do you have to go outside of Ketchikan for that?
Well, one real affordable way to work on historic buildings is to learn and do it yourself. It takes a lot longer, but it's you're really vested in it then.
It can be difficult to find, specific trim profiles or sometimes it's difficult to find the historic channel siding profile, but if you know what you're looking for, Madison is super helpful. And then, there's always Seattle, where lucky to be so close to a big city with a large company, so.
For sure. Can we talk to, we'll let you each weigh in, so I'll start here and we'll go down the line. Can you speak to a success story of preservation in Ketchikan that you'd like to highlight?
the successful example.
A successful, yes.
Well, there's many. I'll try to not think of mine.
You go right ahead.
You're talking about Creek Street, that's an incredible success story.
Yeah, Creek Street itself, there was a time it was 1966, we had an urban renewal program, a federal program. There used to be a native village right next to us right here that is now the parking lot. It was taken out through the urban renewal program. And Creek Street was to have been taken out too. Creek Street had a lot of really ramshackle buildings, and it was to have been part of that urban renewal project. So with good luck, we still have Creek Street. And there were, even though they were really run down, there were a number of buildings that could be saved and did get saved. And there's plenty of examples of them. One that I was spent quite a bit of time on and money was the Star House. It was in really rough shape. Every rainfall like today, you'd have 30, 40 gallons of water in it and whatnot. But it, I think, came back just fine. In fact, parts of the building we were talking about, weather in Ketchikan, at least half the building doesn't get exposed to the southeast, and that siding is still the original siding, 120 years old. There were a number of pilings that are still under the original piling. So it was a matter of kind of focusing especially on the weather side of the building, and then obviously replicating original windows and using a cedar shingle roof as would have been appropriate at the time. So that's, to me, one of the favorites that I've worked on. But Creek Street has a great history. It's really the premier visitor destination, pedestrian destination in Ketchikan. There are a number of excellent renovations on the creek. Even the boardwalk itself is a 1902 boardwalk, and it's still just like it always was. So that integrity of the district is what brings people to it, and that's what contributes to our heritage tourism in the community.
It almost seems unfair to ask you and Tim this question, just because I'm sure there's so many different, adaptive uses of taking old buildings and adapting them for new use that you've been involved with. But can we call upon you to pick a couple favorites?
The Wycliffe School building was really rewarding work on. I think everybody here worked a lot on that. And just a quick synopsis, that was a building that nobody wanted. The school district didn't want it anymore, the borough didn't want it, the city didn't want it. And the initial project didn't materialize, but I think all that effort when the initial project was the arts community was going to renovate it and make it, several different arts groups were going to utilize it, and we had a really good plan for that. That just didn't materialize, but all that work, I think, really was salvaged later when the borough was looking basically for a building that they could own, large enough to house their thing. But it was great. The contractor that was actually the owner at the time, the owner contractor, really valued that, and they even looked into using certain tax credits on that. Just wasn't quite the right project for them, but that was but they still went forward with it.
That shell's all original.
Yeah, it's got new stucco on it basically, but yeah, the shell, it's new, and the framing is, and basically the configuration inside is essentially new. It's just got new materials inside.
That really helped that there was a condition analysis and something. We had done some renderings showing how the building could look, and that really helped. I think the level of enthusiasm for keeping it.
Yeah, well, I mean, so the Wycliffe building, I think it's the case. It was used almost continuously for 80 years.
Yeah. At the time, it was the oldest school still in use, and it would have been great if they could have continued to use it, but that was just a decision that had already been made.
And there were some really challenging code issues for putting. You can't have really little children on a upper floor level. There's some challenges with reusing this as well.
Do you have advice for those that might be thinking of taking on a historic preservation project?
I would say for somebody that's interested in going into a project, don't have like rose-colored glasses. I don't want to take that enthusiasm away, but don't have some unrealistic schedule that you'll be in 6 months or something. You got to give yourself some ways out. There's no shame in having it take a lot longer. It's going to be worth it in the end.
Well, and there's the different government agencies, the building inspector, the fire marshal, the planning and zoning. Make sure you do your homework, because all of a sudden you have this dream of being in this structure, and then you get a red flag, and
Yeah, even if you're just looking at renting a space in a historic building, you need to make sure that the space is compatible with the use. If you're going to have a lot of people in there, or you're going to be doing a commercial kitchen or something that requires a fire
restrooms.
It's important to know that before you sign.
Oh, Terry, you mentioned the Gilmore. Are there any other projects that you've been involved in the past that you'd like to highlight?
Well, we did. Tongass Avenue is Highway 3, and so it's the main corridor in Ketchikan. I mean, you've got 16 miles on each side, and the town's only 3 blocks wide. So you drive by these buildings, and again, we feel sorry for them. The borough was in the Reeve building, and they had studies done on it, and there was 40 pages of bad doo-doo. They didn't want to be there anymore. And they eventually did go into the Wycliffe building, but it sat there, and so we bought it and we completely gutted the building, and it was a very unique structure because it had Piggly Wiggly grocery store in there, and it had several different uses in the 30s. So we wanted to make sure that the building looked exactly the way that it did in 1930, and I think we accomplished that. We used James Martin in Colorado, to select the colors for it. We made sure windows are a big thing in historic properties. That we went through Madison and we picked the exact kind of window, but energy efficient, if you will, to complement the history of the building. So I think it turned out well, and we have some very active businesses in there. The Gilmore was the same way. There was 4,000 square feet of boarded up storage there. There was a bar in there I had to take out. The property, that particular building, when we owned it, a fellow walked in and he said, "I haven't been here since 1934. And he handed me a brochure, the original brochure. from then when he was here. And that building was one of the first fireproof structures built in Alaska. The only thing that was wood in it were the front windows and the room doors. Everything else was wire, lath, and plaster. And it was built out of concrete. And it still has the original steam boiler, 3 to 5 pounds pressure. It never worked. They couldn't get the heat. They had a heat pipe that ran from the Stedman Hotel to the Gilmore Hotel and hooked into the piping because the boiler had quit about 25 years before. But we got it going. It's still running.
Well, like going right along with, heritage tourism, even for those who live here in Ketchikan, there's a certain excitement of going into a building and knowing that something interesting has happened there. Can you all talk a little bit about, there's the colorful characters, plaques that are around town. Can you tell us a little bit about that project? So
About which one?
yes, the colorful characters.
Your site?
Oh, yes. Well, part of telling the story of historic preservation, I think, the building's the most important thing. But the signs, we've developed a program it's a joint program with the Historic Commission, Historic Ketchikan, to provide signs on the buildings that explain the role of people who live there or work there and its history, and they become a very important part of communicating the story. I'm thinking right now, for example, the New York Hotel. It has a very interesting story to tell, both negative and positive. It was the Shimizu family, a very adventurous Japanese family who came and built it, the first New York cafe on the waterfront downtown in 1902, roughly. And at the end, the negative part of the story, they did a great job over there. We, at the end of World War I, moved all of the minorities south of Stedman Street Bridge into Indiantown, both encroaching upon what had been historically native community and at the same time doing this very negative thing of moving minorities out of the downtown. This family, a positive thing, they built the New York Hotel at that time, naming it after the New York Cafe. And they operated for almost 4 generations. That hotel and cafe, very positive story. One negative is they got sent away to internment camp in World War II. And their friends, the positive, their friends in the community operated the hotel and cafe for them. They kept the proceeds and gave it to the Shimizu family when they came back from internment camp. So these stories are important to tell, and you can't just get that story from looking at the building. We need things like the signage program to tell the story. Our Historic Ketchikan walking tour is another opportunity to do that. So we need to do a better job around town of telling stories of our history, basically.
Well, and telling the full story too. There's so much nuance and so much we can learn from visiting these historic places.
Yeah. We've done now 15. We have 10 more likely to do in the downtown over this summer. So that's the good news.
So if someone wanted to celebrate Preservation Month, they could go on a little hunt and see some of these different plaques.
Exactly.
Learn a lot.
Yeah.
Sounds like a fantastic thing to do in the month of May.
Mm-hmm.
So constant adage that I've heard is preservation is a one-way street. That once a building is down or destroyed, there's no going back from that. Can you talk a little bit as to what's lost when a building is destroyed?
Sure.
Well, I think Steve's story about the New York Hotel is a good example. The signage tells the background history of the building, but without the building there, what is the plaque for? What is the signage for? You really need the physical demonstration of history to really feel it and understand it.
2 of my first structures, that I owned in the past are now it's just a level lot. The first property that I purchased was the Knickerbocker Hotel. It was a rooming house, had 23 rooms in it. And then they had a little restaurant downstairs. It was owned by Jean Knickerbocker originally, and I bought it from her. And then when it's ownership as well. Some owners, they don't know how to take care of these properties. They buy them, and then it overcomes them. It's overwhelming, and then it falls into disrepair. There's a lot of those around town, and eventually it got condemned and it was torn down. The Ransom building, which was built on the corner of the tunnel in 1914, the first TV signal in Alaska came out of that building. It was owned by Chuck Jensen and Wally Christensen. They had Midnight Sun television, and they were the entrepreneurs to bring radio and television. And the first signal was run across on the line and shown in the sourdough bar. And that particular building, it was very different. And so, again, the current owner didn't take care of it, and eventually it went to, it's gone. So it's really sad. It's really sad. We did a publication. What was the name of the publication we did? We had the union rooms on the cover. By the time we got the publication done, that building was gone and two others. If you don't take care of them, they fall apart, these structures, very quickly. Water intrusion is the first one. Once the roof starts leaking,
You've had it, unless you do something about it.
right. Well, that's one of the reasons Historic Ketchikan as an organization, when we're trying to do the EH projects, occupancy is key. If you can get someone in there to inhabit the building. We moved our office in there because we know that if that building was to just sit there vacant, it'd do the same thing as others that we've seen around town.
You know, Terry mentioned early on a little bit about the economic importance of historic preservation. I'm just sitting here thinking as you were talking. Take any one of these buildings we've been talking about. That's the Stars, one I'm very familiar with. It had been vacant since its primary owner had died for 20 years maybe, producing nothing in the community. There was a large investment to bring that building back. That means jobs. It means property tax for the borough. There's now active businesses like Soho Kobo and Eagle Arts, and the art school for kids are in there, and that's generating revenues for the community as well. So historic preservation can make a very important contribution to the community. Say nothing about its importance in making us competitive as a visitor destination. That's what we're all about in Ketchikan. And to me, it's our historic properties, our stories, our waterfront. Those are the things that are attractive to people, and that's why I think historic preservation is important for the economy.
Fantastic. Well, are there any questions that you wish I'd asked here? Anything you all would like to add? All right, well, thank you all so much. I think we're all going to really enjoy celebrating all month long with historic preservation. You mentioned the Alaska Association for Preservation, that society, and I know that they've got a whole lineup, a whole calendar of events, of which this museum Midday is a part. So we're very pleased that you all were able to join us today. And we are looking forward to highlighting some of these buildings that you've talked about throughout the month. And of course, directing people your way so that they can learn more about historic preservation and how they can get involved with their own homes or as advocates for our community. Thank you so much.
Thank you.